In the mid-1990s, the Blur albums Parklife and The Great Escape defined Britpop and sold millions. They captured the exuberant self-confidence of youth and made being a cheeky Cockney chappie as fashionable as it had been at the height of the swinging 60s, when British bands and British fashions ruled the world. What Blur did then is the great question. Their next albums, Blur and 13, were markedly different, so much so that many suspected all was not well in the band. Such suspicions were confirmed in 2003 with a departure from the midst of guitarist Graham Coxon. But if critics suspected his loss would weaken the band, they were wrong. Their next album, Think Tank, the first without Graham, is regarded by many as their best to date.
I've always thought about, felt comfortable with musical instruments, you know. Started with a melodica, then a harmonica, and then the piano, and then guitar. And when I sort of worked out how to play guitar, then I started really writing songs in earnest. Before that, it's sort of been bits of music on the piano. So that's kind of why I'm the sort of songwriter I am, because I've got two very different ways of thinking about music. My parents were really into Indian music and Arabic music, and sort of John Cage and things like that, and real old blues and gospel, like Mahalia Jackson and things. And then there was the pop stuff, and I suppose the first time I really got excited about pop music was briefly Adam and the Ants, and then got really excited about the Specials. And then when I started knocking about with Graham, he was really into the Beatles and the Who, so I got into all of that, and then discovered the Kinks through that, and then got very caught up in all of that for a few years, and then sort of started going back to sort of feelings about music that I'd had when I was younger.
I suppose I started thinking about music, playing music with other people when I met Damon, really. But we were playing different kinds of stuff. We were like, he was writing kind of more free or sort of jazz sort of kind of things on piano, and I was playing saxophone with him, and I was learning the guitar at that point as well, really. And our ambitions were mine were pretty low, I think, lower than Damon's. I just wanted to be a sort of group, like sort of the same sort of size as My Bloody Valentine or Dinosaur Jr. or whatever. And Damon said one day on the tube he'd quite like one day to involve brass instruments, and I was quite horrified. I don't know, we were only 19, and I was kind of a bit of an indie purist. Probably am a little bit still.
Although the band's first album, Leisure, and the single from it, There's No Other Way, both did well, Blur seemed to lack an obvious direction. They had found their long-term producer, Stephen Street, but as songwriters still seemed to be finding their feet.
It was the first time I felt freedom to write in the way that I wanted to write. You know, we'd been pretty... we had a lot of kind of pressure on us on the first record to come up with something, you know... I don't know, we felt we had a pressure, I don't know, I just like... I've always lacked kind of, though it might seem hard to believe, self-belief. And I think when we first signed, I was so kind of sort of grateful that someone had actually, because I'd had about 3 years of just going absolutely nowhere and really getting very miserable about, you know, what on earth was going to happen to me, because I dropped out of college after a year and just ended up worked in a fast food shop at Euston Station, and just lots of kind of unpleasant jobs. So the first album, I kind of was, you know, when someone in the record company said we want something that was more this, I tended to do it. But in a way, it was very good discipline, because I learned, you know, that I had to sort of learn what it was about songwriting. You know, I had to kind of really because I think, you know, you can only start to write good songs, well, I could, once I've made a lot of mistakes. It's just unfortunate that some of them are I made them public, but, you know, that happens.
The band then worked with XTC's Andy Partridge, and although the fruit of those recordings would later be rejected by the record company, Andy was to almost accidentally introduce Damon to a whole new way of writing songs.
They weren't demos, they were finished, and they were supposed to be kind of sort of the first 3 songs of the second album, but they just... But, you know, I learned a lot from working with him, and he gave me his 8, but didn't give me it, actually made me pay for it. So I bought it off him for £400 or something, and my songwriting it started really in earnest when I got that machine, and I wrote. I've written in some way every at least once song. Well, Parklife and Modern Life's Rubbish, or Parklife especially, was all written on it, and it was. I think that's where I started to get that sense of quite a bigger arrangements, because it was the first time I had something at home which I could actually work, because I'm not very technically minded, you know, and I do my guitar track, drum track, 2 vocals, whatever, and I still have 4 tracks left. So and I had keyboards and stupid instruments. So I used to always fill it up, you know. So it was a very, very...
I was listening to Parklife the other night, and I was kind of a bit embarrassed. I mean, it's decent pop music, I suppose, but decent pop music doesn't really make me feel happy.
I was very proud of it. I remember listening to it back, thinking... I mean, not thinking it was going to be really successful, but just thinking it was kind of, it was pretty cool, you know. And, I'd never felt particularly cool, so it was nice to feel cool.
When we were recording stuff like on Parklife, I was a little bit... I wouldn't be pressing my points very much. If I wanted, I'd be too embarrassed to say I wanted the guitars louder, because I thought I'd appear as an egoist or something like that, so I'd stay quite quiet, and in that way the importance of the guitars went pretty much at the expense of weird keyboards and too many backing vocals. And in that way I think it sounds poppy. But once you take away things that aren't needed, it becomes a little more raw and a bit more essential. Like, I suppose we're learning that with the last 2 records anyway.
The day that Girls and Boys went in the charts at 5, number 5, I started, you know, bearing in mind that on the previous album we hadn't got any higher than 26. So it was a big leap, you know. I started getting panic attacks, and I just, you know, I had a really bad time. But I mean, it was bad during the day and great at night, because I'd just drink to sort of sort myself out, and then I'd have a great night, but then I'd wake up and it would be even worse the next day. So, you know, you have to be careful of things like that, otherwise they can get on top of you.